When you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see?
When I look in the mirror, I see a loser. A loser trying to convince himself he's a winner. Because that's what everybody's been telling me my whole life. I'm somebody. But I ain't. I'm nobody, man.
85% of adults have drank alcohol in their life. It's an extremely popular drug that decreases specific neuronal excitation in your brain with biological byproducts that have a huge impact on your body. So if you're wanting to partake in a bevy, short for beverage, is there an ideal time for your physiology? Is it better to day drink or drink at night?
When you drink a shot of vodka, 20% of the alcohol is absorbed by the stomach, 80% in the small intestine, where it goes into your bloodstream, then to your liver to be metabolized. Ethanol gets into cells by passive diffusion, so the more you drink, the faster you get drunk. And when alcohol accumulates and finally gets to your brain, it suppresses the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate, which causes information transfer in the brain to become slower, with only the largest signals making it through. You feel less, perceive less, notice less, and remember less.
If you're a drinker, we hate to be the ones to break some sobering news to you, but a major new study says no amount of alcohol is good for your overall health, not even that cheeky glass of red wine you might be holding as we speak.
Alcohol is holding you back, and that's it. It's simple, right? If you are regularly consuming alcohol, it is holding you back.
Even if you're only very periodically consuming it, it's holding you back. There is no positive physiological benefit whatsoever that comes from drinking.
Yeah, and let's talk about that specifically, right? We don't, a lot of people don't want to hear that message, oh, my trainers give me cancer, right? All the health issue. But the facts are absolutely there. It's 100% poison. It's neurotoxic. It's terrible for our brains. It's terrible for our bodies. There are no physiological benefits at all whatsoever to drinking alcohol.
The overall risk of liquor outweighs any known benefits. It says alcohol accounted for nearly 1 in 10 deaths in people between the ages of 15 and 49. That data was recorded in 2016. Across all age groups, alcohol was associated with 2.8 million deaths.
As you grow up, you start to do different sorts of events. You'll go for dinner more, you'll go to quieter venues, you'll go to somewhere where there's live music, where you can have a conversation. And that sort of enjoyment is facilitated more by being sober. So I wonder whether it's a byproduct of the kind of events that young people typically attend.
I think that's as well, when you're in an environment where everybody else is drunk, like that's full on. When you're sober and you're just looking at people, it's heavy. I feel like if I'm in an environment where everybody's drunk, I almost need to be drunk just to
deal with it,
tolerate it.
Let's say you're 35 now and you don't change your job. Well, you'll be 40 so fast you can't even believe it. It'll just happen. Like it'll take 5 years, but it happens overnight in the same way. And if you haven't changed, then you'll be the same except worse. So that's the alternative. If you don't find what you're doing sufficiently productive or responsible or meaningful or engaging or all of that, it's like, well, there's a big risk in changing it. It's like, yeah, there is.
When you hear the term a functional alcoholic, or you almost want to blame them and say well, you just have this distorted view of what's functional, right? But what I'm hearing is that it's not really distorted. They're legitimately feeling functional because A, they may have started with metabolic dysfunction, but they've just created so much more metabolic dysfunction that practically the only way they feel semi-normal is by functioning with alcohol.
Yes.
That's very scary.
That's the trap.
And then, I mean, when you hear you hear the terms thrown around like, oh, he pickled himself with alcohol. And I used to think like, oh, when someone pickles themselves by, like, see the crusty old guy that's just like kind of talking crazy because, oh, he pickled himself, right? I used to think, oh, the cirrhosis, he pickled his organs. It almost seems as though, like, no, pickled cellular function. And that's why you have all this just multiple levels of deterioration that seem to happen.
We have an amazing family, except for the fact that my husband is an alcoholic and an addict.
It is 8:36 in the morning in the AMs. I bought this 12-pack at 7:05 probably. And this is my third beer. Well, out of the 12-pack I've had, I think it's my 5th beer of the day.
For many years, it's been known that high levels of alcohol consumption, so 12 to 24 drinks per week or more, is certainly causing neurodegeneration, in particular of the so-called neocortex, the outer layers of the brain that house associative memories, that house our ability to think and plan, that house our ability to regulate our more primitive drives. according to context, etc. To make very clear, drinking a lot, so having 3 or 4 drinks per night every night of the week, is clearly bad for the brain. Hangover is a constellation of effects ranging from headache to nausea to what's sometimes called anxiety, which is anxiety that follows a day of drinking. Anxiety, I think we can understand physiologically if we think about that process of alcohol intake increasing the amount of cortisol and the ratio of cortisol to some other stress hormones. That well explains why some people wake up the day after or even the day after a night drinking and feel anxious and not well and stressed for reasons they don't know.
The other huge whammy, unfortunately, is that alcohol also gets converted into a molecule called acetaldehyde, which is toxic to mitochondria and cells. And that's its primary source of toxicity. And so if people drink a massive amount and they die of alcohol poisoning, what's actually happening is that acetaldehyde levels are rising and they are poisoning the mitochondria in their cells, and that can cause death. If you do it at a lesser level and just have a few drinks every day, but you're chronically drinking, or you binge drink a few times a week, go out with the guys and party and end up having 10 drinks, you're actually damaging the mitochondria in your cells. And if you do that over time, you're actually making the brain metabolic impairment worse. So you're actually making brain metabolism worse over time. And then that fuels your need for the acetate from the alcohol to fuel your brain cells. And now you're screwed because you're using the alcohol as a treatment to feel better, and yet it's causing more and more harm and damage.
If you really are an alcoholic and you find your way into 12-step, there is the initial phase of detoxifying your body, right? And perhaps the Trojan horse there is people come in, they're just like, I just want to learn how to stop drinking. What they don't realize and what comes later is this notion that putting the bottle down is really just the beginning of trying to figure out a way to be emotionally sober, because when you no longer have that coping mechanism, all of the uncomfortable emotions flare up and you're left with no tools for how to manage them, because the way that you have done it historically has been taken away. So in the case of the people that you have worked with, given that, perhaps they're not alcoholics, on some level, everybody is self-medicating with alcohol.
When you go to a restaurant, the first thing they do is put bread on the table and ask if you want alcohol, because both of them drop your frontal lobes. Both of them make it more likely you're going to order more and spend more money at the restaurant. So the bread is an investment on their part, because bread gives you a sugar spike, a blood sugar spike, which then pushes serotonin in your brain and makes you happy. But serotonin drops frontal lobe function. One thing they never tell you when they give you an SSRI for depression is, oh, you're going to become a little bit more impulsive because it's going to drop your frontal lobes. And then alcohol, which also drops your frontal lobes. So you'll drop more cash in the restaurant.
So many athletes, particular even like endurance athletes, are notorious for, they drink a lot of calories. They really do. And it's a lot of athletes in general just drink alcohol. And I just think about the metabolic impairment that happens as a result of that they may not even be aware of, especially as they get into their 30s and their 40s, like the amount of performance that's potentially being left on the table. I mean, obviously there's more important things at play than just how fast someone can run a marathon or whatever. There's obviously more life and death situations, but I try to stress to people, like, if you're an athlete and you want optimal performance, like, you can make the argument all day long that it helps you relax and helps you sleep and helps you wind down, but the evidence is very clear on slow wave sleep and how it impacts that, which we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But it's what I'm hearing is that it just validates what I've felt from the metabolic side in the body. I mean, like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, it feels like everything preferentially has to take a back seat to what the liver can deal with, because the liver has to deal with that acetaldehyde, so everything else just kind of, hey, you got to go on the back burner here for a minute while we deal with this.
And doesn't realize just how close he has become to losing everything.
This is it. This is the last resort.
Alcohol's effects on the brain are quite complex. So just about any substance that people experience some kind of pleasure from tend to affect the brain centers that are involved in reward and control. And then over time with the addiction, the brain that external stimulant there, and what ends up happening is some of those dopamine receptors kind of get used to having that, and they end up either becoming less sensitive or less productive of dopamine, so that when you stop, your brain's not really ready for that. When someone is alcohol dependent, it is one of the most destructive drugs to various parts of your body and different organ systems. From the top down, chronic alcohol dependence can have significant effects on cognitive functioning, memory, motor coordination, all of which is controlled up in the brain. And you can have esophageal problems down into the stomach, pancreas, the liver, because the liver is the organ that kind of clears a lot of the toxic things out of our body. When that starts shutting down, it not only is not able to really process alcohol and its toxic byproducts well, but there are other things that it just starts losing functioning.
Do you have a high level of stress in your life? We just talked about why stress is absolutely intrinsically linked to your relationship with alcohol. It's the most well-used, known, readily available tool for dealing with stress. But it also creates stress. Alcohol releases significant amounts of cortisol. In fact, they recently found regular alcohol consumption over time increases the production of cortisol. Okay, so you're not only releasing cortisol in the moment, but you're producing more cortisol over time. Now, cortisol sends you into fight or flight.
If I don't have alcohol, I become extremely irritable, and nothing you say to me is going to make sense. I'm too wound up about where the hell my next buzz is going to come from. You tell me that ain't some twisted political, everybody's...
Alcohol is an extraordinarily pernicious drug, and if you're inclined towards it, you can be inclined towards it because you're sensitive to its anxiety-reducing properties, or you can be sensitive to it because it enhances social communication, or because it produces a psychomotor high like cocaine, or all of those at once. And if you're particularly predisposed to alcoholism, you can experience all three at once.
Chronic drinking doesn't necessarily mean every day and every night. It could be the person that simply drinks every Thursday or every Friday, or just once a week has 3 or 4 drinks, or maybe even a few more. That person is going to experience a decrease in this top-down inhibition, so an increase in impulsivity and habitual behavior because the brake on those behaviors has been removed while they're drinking, but also changes in the very neural circuits that allow habitual and impulsive behavior to occur more readily even when they're not drinking.
I love you, and I don't want to lose you. And I'm here to help you see your potential as a husband, a father, and a friend. I want you to be able to reach your goals as a songwriter and a musician. And I'm here because I couldn't think of any other way to help you get back home to your family. The loss of your presence at home is felt on a daily basis. And this makes me feel lost because I didn't marry you to become a single parent. I'm asking you if you'll please get help today.
You want an answer?
I'm not going to treatment now.
I'm begging you to please get help today.
I'm not interested. I ain't going nowhere. Rehabs.
All right, so tell them if the answer's no.
The answer's no. Of course the answer's no. I ain't going. Ain't happening. Y'all. You. Call y'all. Appreciate you. Good. Thank you. Thanks for dragging me through all this and lying to me this whole time. Every single one of y'all.
Whatever you're doing right now has all sorts of risks. You're just blind to them because you've habituated to them. They've become invisible. You can't wait around to make things better on the assumption that what you're doing already is without risk. Don't hit anything harder than it needs to be hit. That's a good rule of thumb.
I realized that the only thing I bonded with some people over was that we both ended up getting drunk in the same places each week. But beyond that, I didn't really have anything in common with them. Some friends started to drift away, which was fine. But I realized that if they were genuine friends, they'd support me in the path to bettering myself. And if friends only wanted to be around me when I was destroying myself along with them, then maybe I needed better friends.
Remember, there are people who have genetic variants, that meaning genes that they inherited from their parents, that make it more likely that they will become alcoholics. If people are ingesting alcohol, even if it's not every night, there are well-recognized changes in neural circuits, there are well-recognized changes in neurochemistry within the brain, and there are well-recognized changes in the brain-to-body stress system. Increased stress when people are not drinking, diminished mood and feelings of well-being when people are not drinking, and, as you'll soon learn, changes in the neural circuitry cause people to want to drink even more in order to get just back to baseline, or the place that they were in terms of their stress modulation and in terms of their feelings of mood before they ever started drinking in the first place. Those sorts of drinking patterns are changing neural circuitry, and they're changing hormone circuitry. They're actually changing them for the worse. And worse is defined as making people less resilient to stress, higher levels of baseline stress, and lower mood overall.
Stop. No. We're doing this for you.
Bryson,
Stop.
wait.
Stop and listen to me, please.
You get hands off me.
Oh, please stop. Please. No, you don't.
Oh, y'all. I'll see you in court. Such can't pay for it.
Just listen.
No, I'll follow.
Remember, this is just ready to go. Just ready to go. They lost him.
Here's something most people don't know about marijuana. Officially, the US federal government classifies it as a Schedule I drug. That is the strictest classification they have, period, full stop. That means the government thinks marijuana is more dangerous than Schedule II drugs like cocaine or meth. It means they think marijuana is on the same plane as heroin. You know how many people died directly from overdosing on marijuana? 0. And I don't mean 0 in 2010. I mean 0 in basically recorded human history. There is one drug you won't see on there, even though it is a hell of a lot more dangerous than pot or even cocaine. That's alcohol. The thing about alcohol is it's really bad for you, lethally bad for you. I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I enjoy a drink. But the evidence on this, you cannot run away from. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say there are 88,000 deaths each year attributable to alcohol.
But nonetheless, when you ingest ethanol, NAD and related biochemical pathways are involved in converting that ethanol into something called acetaldehyde. It's broken down into acetaldehyde. And if you thought ethanol was bad, acetaldehyde is particularly bad. Acetaldehyde is poison. It will kill cells. It damages and kills cells. It's discriminant as to which cells it damages and kills.
Alcohol's pretty good.
Yeah.
So you better find something a lot better, man. Yeah, and it is. And then estimable people do estimable things. It's like, yeah, well, you want to figure out something that you're doing with your life that's worth not getting drunk and screwing up. Why do people drink too much? Well, because it's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, okay, so why stop? Well, you do stupid things when you're drunk. You hurt yourself. You compromise your health. It's really hard on the people around you. You tend to turn into a liar, and it screws up your life.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but it's pretty fun. Yeah, well, it is. But you need something better than that. And what's better isn't being straight and not making mistakes. It's like that's all prohibition in some sense. What's better is, no, you need an adventure, man. You need to get out there and have something to do.
Yeah.
And something worth waking up for. And that's the substitute for the addiction. Actually, the addiction is the substitute for that, if truth be known.
People who drink regularly, so this again could be just 1 or 2 drinks per night, or it could be somebody that drinks just on Fridays or just on Saturdays or maybe just on the weekend, 2 to 4 drinks. Well, those people experience changes in their hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that result in more cortisol, more of this so-called stress hormone being released at baseline when they are not drinking. This is really important. People who drink a bit, and when I say a bit, I don't mean 1 or 2 sips or even a glass of wine every once in a while. I mean, again, people that are maybe having 1 drink a night with dinner and maybe on the weekend a few more. Again, I offer a bunch of different patterns to explain how it could also be 2 or 3 drinks on Friday or 6 drinks only on Saturday. Well, all of those groups experience increases in cortisol release from their adrenal glands when they are not drinking. And as a consequence, they feel more stressed and more anxiety when they aren't drinking. This is a seldom talked about effect of alcohol because so often we hear about the immediate effects of alcohol, right? And we've been talking about some of those effects. Effects like reducing the amount of stress. I mean, how many times have we heard somebody say, oh, I need a drink, and then they have a drink and they're like, calm down. Now they can shake off the thoughts about the day's work. They can start to think about things in a maybe more grounded or rational way, or at least they believe that, or they can somehow just relax themselves. Well, while that very well may be true, that it can relax them, when they are not drinking, that level of cortisol that's released at baseline has increased substantially. Again, this relates to a defined neural circuit between brain and body, and it has to do with the ratio of cortisol to some of the other hormones involved in the stress response.
Sometimes some habits can turn into lifestyles, and certain lifestyles don't lead to all the benefits and all the amazing things that life has to offer. Some lifestyles lead to very dark paths, depression, anxiety, stress, and if not controlled, can also lead to some of the worst case scenarios out there in life. One of them being never reaching your capacity, never really having an identity or a self-worth, losing all integrity, all dignity, and losing yourself. Just a few years ago, I was in a very dark place in my life. They say that depression comes from the inability to construct the future in your mind. I couldn't see the future. I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I was wanting to be a certain person, but making all the wrong decisions. I made a lot of mistakes. When it comes to alcohol itself, which is something that I was struggling with at the time, it went slowly from being a work hard, play hard, have a drink, to 2 drinks, to 3 drinks, to then a habit, to then a daily habit, to then a 24/7 habit, to then a every weekend habit, getting lost in myself habit. Sometimes if you don't watch the kind of habits that you're building, they become lifestyles. Before I knew it, I was digging myself a hole, and everywhere I looked, it was so dark, and I lost myself. I spiraled into a sense of no self-worth, and I struggled a lot, and nobody knew. I hit rock bottom, to the point where I almost lost my job, to the point where some people had to have very tough conversations with me. Some friends had to deal with my drama, and they say hurting people hurt people. I was hurting inside, and I was hurting others and didn't even know it.
You have this focus, you can control your brain, you understand the big picture. You go through life. You always hear people tell you that alcohol is not good for you. I told you. I never was like, dude, you shouldn't drink.
You gave me more shit about getting a Coke the first time, like a Coca soda.
Coca-Cola.
More than you ever did about anything drinking.
Well, I don't like that high fructose corn syrup. But you heard that, you never really understood the power of not drinking. You know what I'm saying? Like, as many people said, oh yeah, it's a waste, it's poison, it's all this stuff. You never said to yourself, you know what? For a long time, 15 years of drinking, you never said to yourself, my life would be way better if I stopped, right? Yeah. Now that you've stopped, is it even better than you thought it would be? Or you had heard it would be?
Put it this way, I never really actually imagined it. I just knew it as like the answers to a test. If someone were to ask me, would your life be better or worse without drinking? I'd be like, better, because I know that's true. I can't feel.
The person who is drinking 2 or 3 times a week will have less blood flow in their brain.
And will that have changed the shape of their brain?
Yes, it'll be a little bit more shriveled.
And then that means their behavior is going to change as well.
They'll have a little bit less impulse control.
And when you look at the brain of an
a little bit less impulse control when you're doing hard things like marriage. Not a good thing. Or raising children or managing a business. It's like you don't want a little bit worse decision.
People convince themselves, right now we're in dry January. They're like, okay, I do dry January every year, therefore I don't have a problem. Mm-hmm. But I also drink 3 bottles of wine every day at lunch. Now, I know a guy who said that to me, right?
Yeah.
You know, he drinks 3 bottles of wine at lunch every day, probably finishes off with all sorts of whiskey at home
And because
later.
he can do dry January, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Because he has proved to himself that he can quit and put it down when he wants to. Never mind, the white knuckling and whatever.
All of those things. The delusion.
Went into, just making it to day 30 so he could continue to perpetuate that argument as a form of denial. But
millions and millions of people, Rich. Millions and millions of people.
This is why, people who come into Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step programs will, once they, kind of get well or better, will identify as a grateful alcoholic or addict because the pain was so severe and the habit was so pronounced, they were forced to reckon with it and, break up with that lover. And as a result, have been blessed with tools and this brand new life that has created something wonderful out of, this disease. But for the person who's a heavy user or drinker, who can continue along that path without wreaking inadequate amount of havoc in their life, where they have to confront or deal with the fact that they might have a problem. They're stuck in a cycle that is harder to break because there aren't circumstances you can point to say it's time, you got to give it up.
Yeah.
And they live their lives, most of them live the rest of their lives in this suboptimal state where they're really not living the life that is freely available to them otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if we can direct the conversation to where people are looking, if they're not looking to stop drinking, then where are they looking?
Alcoholism wants you alone, it wants you sick, and then it wants to kill you. And it took over decades of my life, and I pray to you, if you worry that you're having this problem, or you know somebody that is, raise your hand, find somebody who's smarter than you about this, and talk to them, and be honest about it, because the secrets are what kill us. The thing that always makes me cry, and I hope I don't cry here, is that it's not fair. It's not fair. That I had to go through this disease while the other 5 didn't. They got everything that I got. But I had to fight this thing, and still have to fight this thing. So just to end this on a good note, there are people that will help you, and get their help. It doesn't go away. It never goes away.